My career sucks.
Sex just isn't the same.
What's my purpose?
Where did this fat come from?
My relationship is killing me.
I'll never be happy.
My debt is piling up. I'll never find love. Why can't I be like other gay guys? Hey guys, it's time to get a grip, stop whining, make a bold move, and do something amazing with your 40-plus gay life. Let's get to the show with your Tell It Like It Is host, Rick Clemons, who does his best to never act like a dick or a diva unless you act like one first.
Hey, guys of the 40-plus Gay Men Gay Talk podcast followers. I'm so excited to be here with you once again. Happy Friday to you. And hey, happy being sexual beings and being who you want to be in the world. And also, if you are someone who is a faith-based person, a religious follower, whatever that may be, I want to say welcome to you too, because you can be gay, you can be lesbian, bisexual, all these different things. And you can also be that religious sacred space person. But most people say, no, you can't. These two things cannot coexist. And today we are going to take you to a new way of looking at this with a repeat guest of mine. And he's actually the first guest that we're doing the video podcast with. His name is Craig Cullinane. He has been on our podcast a couple of times before. He was part of the Body Electric world. He still is, but he was part of the key leadership team there for a while. He's an amazing guy, amazing coach. And guess what we're going to talk about? Sex and the faith and the church. Oh my God, Craig, what are we doing? Are we going to hell right now, buddy, for doing this? I don't know.
Going to heaven, baby.
Yeah, let's do it. But I am so excited to have this conversation. A mutual friend of ours, John Carl Lewis, who has been on the podcast as well, approached me and he said, hey, Craig and I have been working together to do something. And we really are going to unfold this trauma, this cultism that has come around being sexual beings and then going, oh, I can't be a person of faith. So bring on the electric, man. Like, why did this interest you? I mean, I know why it interests me, but why, when John Carl approached you, was like, let's put a twist in this, even though it's not just for, I know you're trying to attract clergy and religious leaders and all that. But there's something really special around, like, let's unpack this and get this bullshit, so to speak, out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you so much for having me on again. It's so great to be with you.
Oh, it's always good to have you, buddy.
Wonderful work you do and service to the people. And is it okay if I say congratulations on the wedding of your daughter?
Yeah, for those who, well, I think I may have alluded to it in the past, but yes, I, as a gay man. So once again, guys, I'm breaking the mold and going, the kids are all right. Yes, I raised this lovely young bride who I walked down the aisle. My husband and I walked her down the aisle together last Saturday. And she got married to a man. I guess you can be raised by two gay men and you're still heterosexual. Yeah. So there we go for that. But we all
and these beautiful meaningful rituals like marriage that comes down through history and culture that people find meaningful, and that we're in some ways lucky enough to be alive in the history of the world where gay folk, queer folk can have that experience too here. And so it's really just very special and very meaningful for some people.
Well, at least for now. If some other political party gets their way, they may try to take that away from us. But I think we're here to be queer and fight for that too. But you're right; it is a ritual. And even though my kids didn't do anything spiritual, religious related, there's still the ritual of the walking down the aisle, the professing their love, blah, 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 blah. And I think sometimes this is where people lose this piece of, they've been so indoctrinated. I'm raising my hands, guys. I'm raising my hands. I was indoctrinated through Seventh-day Adventist faith. And that was part of my reason there was so much shame around being a gay man. And I think that's where you're headed with this new, I shouldn't say new version of Body Electric, but you're bringing it like, we really want to release the religious shame, right?
Yeah. Well, I think I like to kind of reframe, it's actually this religious programming that many of us have experienced that has informed our lives, informed our relationship to our bodies, informed our relationship to sex, to our erotic selves. And really, I think Body Electric, for me anyway, in the most general sense, Body Electric is a pathway towards personal liberation. Liberation from the stories, from the programming, from family, from culture, from our lived experience that keep us from being our most fully expressed selves, from really getting curious about our desires, really getting curious about who am I if I walk in the world or engage with people sexually, erotically, or in all ways from a place of liberation, trying to soften up and free some of the shame that we've been told is true about us, about our bodies, about sex. And I also love the idea of, in terms of, religion and religious programming and hearing about your daughter's wedding, the idea that we can reframe the idea of a religious or spiritual experience and I like the language of that this is a sacred experience. That sacred can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. There's a person named Stuart Weil. There's a great quote I love. He says, "How do you make something sacred? You say this is sacred, and then you treat it that way." So the idea that sacredness is something deeply meaningful for you, and that's super personal. And again, it can come from a religious context if you find religion and religious faith meaningful and important, but it doesn't have to. And that nobody gets to tell us what's sacred to us. We can
Right.
reclaim sacredness. And part of that is reclaiming the sacredness of our own erotic body, reclaiming the sacredness of how we are sexual beings. And, that's what I'm curious about, the liberation from the old stories that no longer serve.
I've always felt, and I knew, I guess I would say I knew I was a sexual being from a pretty young age. Now, again,
Yeah.
those who've listened to the podcast know that there was a sexual awakening. I don't like to call it abuse, even though that was what it was. There was a
Mm-hmm.
sexual awakening by an older adult in my life. But
Mm-hmm.
even in that moment, I realized I'm very much a sexual being. But even in all the experiences that I've had, there's always been a sacredness to it, Craig. There's like, it's not
Yeah.
just wham bam, fuck you, sir. I mean, that, or ma'am, when I was in the
Yeah.
heterosexual as part of my life. There's a sacredness to it because there's nothing more, to me, there's nothing more vulnerable than, first of all, being naked in your truth, like being truly
Yes.
vulnerable and naked. And there's nothing even more vulnerable than being naked with another human being, because there's so much judgment and stuff that comes around because of societal upbringing, like, oh, nakedness. I still, when I see a guy walking around with his shirt off, which, hello, happy to see that, right? There's also
Mm-hmm.
this twinge of, I wish we were such an accepting society that women could feel comfortable doing that too, because
Absolutely.
women are beautiful. Women are beautiful.
Yeah. And it's just some
Even if
kind
I,
of
as a gay
shame
man,
story that,
yeah, I think women would, embrace, not all women, right? But it's a shame that we can't allow women that same freedom. And I'm so glad you brought
yes.
up this eroticism, the sacredness of, it's about that liberation piece. And
Right.
so those of us who've gone through that experience, which is many of us in our community, let's just be honest about that. This religious shame, like, ooh, you can't be erotic, you can't be sexual, all of this is many times what has screwed up many gay men. I'm going to go to the gay men part since that's who we're talking.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why they struggle so much to have intimacy, to be in a
Yes.
relationship, to have conversations about either monogamy or non-monogamy.
Mhm.
All of these things come from, here's the construct. This is how you're
Yeah.
supposed to be, versus what does it look like if you're just free and liberated?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like we can all check in with our own experience. I grew up in a very large, I'm the youngest of a very large Irish Catholic family,
Mm-hmm.
and my experience of my parents, by the time they got to me, weren't going to church. They weren't connected as much, although my older siblings did. And so I wasn't going to church. And for me personally, I wasn't kind of like negatively indoctrinated in like by going to church and hearing stories about who I am in any way, let alone a gay person. But I do know I notice for myself the download, the transmission of shame that
Mm-hmm.
comes from religious thought systems like the Catholic Church and other churches and other religious bodies, and how it lives in my life. And like for me, it has shown up as a real journey around healing body shame. So that's been a real journey. And I really feel like it's connected to some of those ways that we're told in religious contexts, like, that our bodies are bad or they need to be subdued,
Mm-hmm.
that our erotic life, sexual energy, our curiosity. I mean, all people are an erotic being on some level. That shit
Absolutely.
is wrong or bad. And largely, there's the direct language about it that is wrong or bad, but it's also often the what's not spoken about and what never is given attention. Like my parents never spoke to me about sex ever one
Mhm.
time, and that has an impact too. You know, when all you hear in this incredibly powerful part of our experience, when you hear nothing, that
Right.
also transmits something. Another way that I find myself has the way I think religious programming, cultural programming, being Irish Catholic anyway, is, and I think many people can relate to this, is the compartmentalization of sex and sexual activity in
Mhm.
my life. How like I can live this whole life, but like I'm only having sex in this kind of way, in this corner, in that compartment way. Oftentimes it's secretive, it's shame based. I don't share about it. You know, I'm alone or I'm,
Yep.
with a stranger, or like the ways that those things work out are largely, I guess, queer folk, queer men can relate,
Mhm.
gay men. And so I notice in my life, like, wow, like I have a lot of unexamined, deep stories that live
Yep.
in my body and my consciousness about my beliefs about sex and who I am as an erotic being. And it leads me rather than experiencing the joy and pleasure of being an erotic being on planet Earth. Like it's very rare, y'all. We're in a
Mhm.
body on planet Earth. It doesn't happen that often. And guess what?
Right.
These bodies can offer us so much pleasure and joy and connection that we live
Absolutely.
our lives in this very small way.
Mhm.
And so the question is like, if I gave some attention to how I've been programmed, to the
Mhm.
stories that live in my body and in my consciousness unconsciously, and I work to free them and liberate them a little bit, what could happen for me? Could
Mhm.
I be having connected, meaningful, pleasurable sexual and erotic experiences with other people? So that's what I'm curious about. I'm curious about your Seventh Day Adventist upbringing and how you think that might have impacted you and your relationship to all of this.
Oh, it totally fucked me up.
Yeah,
Yes and no. So I'll just give you a glimpse into it. Like when I was in high school. So I mean, I went through Seventh Day Adventist school system all the way till I was a second year in college. High school was an interesting experience because the high school I went to was a boarding school, but I wasn't part of the boarding school environment. I lived in what they called the village. I came in, and just came to high school like any other high school, but the majority of the students on campus were living in dorms. So there was that interesting piece. Well, because there were dorms, there was the boys' dorms and there was the girls' dorms, and they were on two different sides of the campus. You could only, as a boy, go over to the lobby of the girls' dorm, and that's as far as you could go. You were never permitted into the floors except like open house. There was a time you could walk through and see how each students decorated their room. It was like, that sort of thing. But other than that, it was it was almost like kind of handmade tale. You do not cross the line, right? We did not have dances because that's one of the Seventh Day Adventist things at the time. I don't know how much that is at the time now. You didn't have
very
dances.
footloose.
Yeah, exactly. There was, there wasn't really sporting events. Like there was no homecoming or anything. We didn't compete with other schools or anything. So everything was kind of very separated, always separated. Our quote prom was usually a dinner at a local space out off campus. There was the one time you could actually like sit with your quote date, so to speak, and you could sit with your date or whatever at, basketball games and stuff that were going on campus. But it was very much men are here, women are here, men are here, women are here sort of mentality. And so obviously, when you are deprived as beings, you want to do the thing you're being deprived of. So there was lots of people sneaking around, finding ways, finding places on campus, even though, oh, we can't be together. Everybody knew where the hidden closets were and everything that you could go make out. Some people took it to the point of where they could have sex, all these sort of things. And there was almost this like hypersexuality, eruption that was, no pun intended, that was just waiting to erupt, right? Because it was so constrained, like you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. to the point of even on quote prom night, I remember mine specifically. I went with a girlfriend of mine that wasn't my girlfriend, just a friend. And I knew then I was more in love with my best friend than I was any woman on campus, but I couldn't say that, right? We have the dinner, we come back, we go into the campus theater to watch the Disney movie that was the highlight of our prom night or whatever it was. And, all those had to be met a certain standard to watch even a movie, because Seventh-day Adventists didn't go to movies. That was the no-no too. They actually had faculty members walking up and down throughout the theater aisles to make sure nobody was holding hands, you weren't touching. So when you're suddenly deprived of all these things, all you're doing is amping up what's already going on as a teenager. Like, I just want to have sex, I just want to touch, so it was almost contradictory.
Because those are those are these natural ways that we are as humans.
Exactly.
We're playful,
so now
we're sexual. Yeah.
Right. So now take this and roll this forward, which I think is very similar in many faith-based sort of systems. You walk away from a system like that as an adult. Why is anybody so surprised that a lot of people are then really hypersexual? Like, I just got to go do this. And in my world, as soon as I started being free, I was like a little Energizer Bunny sex rabbit. I just wanted sex within whoever came along, which then led me to the shame of hiding anytime I wanted to do that, which led me to popping into adult bookstores, going into the video areas, all this sort of stuff. But the whole thing was, go do this, don't tell anybody, keep it hidden. Go do this, don't tell anybody, keep it hidden.
If you zoom out from a huge, like, global level, I mean, I think one of what's amazing to me, Body Electric is what I consider Body Electric to be. One of the things I think it is one of the great vehicles of what I call experiential erotic education, the experiential sexual and erotic education that none of us ever got. And it's absolutely amazing how terrible human communities are at supporting the healthy development of erotic people, sexual people. And it's like, and you think about all the thought systems that said you can't touch, you can't play, you can't connect, trying to suppress all that. And it's like, from my perspective, that's one of the biggest reasons there's so much violence in the world.
Absolutely.
People have had no opportunity to experience or practice what it means to be in relationship in a healthy and skillful way with our own erotic energy, with our own sexual energy. And because we push it down and we suppress it, it becomes about power and control and shame. And that leads to violence. That leads to real problems with people all over the world.
One of the biggest things it leads to, Craig, is, and I deal with this all the time, and I've, in my own relationship, 23 years we've been together, and it took a long time and it still worked. It leads to people not being able to talk about what they want sexually and what they want intimately, because there's this, we can't talk about this stuff. And I remember one of the very first times I said to my husband what I wanted sexually, I was petrified. I'm like, he's going to want to leave me. He's not going to want to be with me. All these sort of things, right?
Yes.
And there's so much shame that comes around this. One of my best professional colleagues is Dr. Joe Court, which many people know. And he and I have talked about this numerous times, of like how this layering of anything to do with sexuality of shame causes so much in relationships. If you can't talk to your spouse about sex or intimacy, I can almost guarantee you it is because it goes back to how you were socialized and raised and your religious upbringing, if that's part of the equation. Because if any part of that was shame, we don't talk about this, it's a piece of, okay, this is how I'm going to do this in life. And as parents, I feel like as parents, my husband and I have been very open with our daughters, not to the point of weird about it, but like, we joke about things. And it's
destigmatizes it because you actually give it some space, right?
Right. It's like, it helps you have the good conversations. And I think that's where you're going with this whole Body Electric thing, with the focus that you've got coming up, which we're going to talk about real quick here. Well, first I want to just say, I feel like that's, as you said, I think Body Electric is a whole lot about this beautiful erotic education.
Yes.
When you said those words, it's like that really landed for me.
Yeah. And, one thing we talk about too in Body Electric, just generally, which I think is also interesting, is kind of like, what's my relationship with pleasure?
Hmm.
Pleasure is something that the church and religious institutions is not interested in talking about. They're not. They
Hmm.
don't. They want to. They want to suppress pleasure because it's a. It's
Yes.
a. It's a power that they feel like they can't control. Right. I mean, these
Hmm.
are generalizations.
Yes.
And so one thing in Body Electric that we're very interested in is this question of like, what is my relationship to pleasure? I live in
Hmm.
this body that gives me so much pleasure if I just welcome it. There's a great tantric principle. Pleasure is healing. And when
Hmm.
we tap and we wake up and we spread and we get into relationship with pleasure in our lives, that's a healing energy. All of a sudden, things that I'm holding on to fall away more quickly, right? The sensuality of life activates. The food tastes better. The wind on
Hmm.
the cheek feels nicer. Like those moments we want to cultivate and be really in our life, savoring
Hmm.
pleasure and eroticism of all aspects of life can
Yep.
actually happen. Right? And we talk also about what's my relationship with self pleasure, like my own hands on my own body. Kind of
Hmm.
reclaiming masturbation, reclaiming self pleasure as a life giving, beautiful act. Rather than, and it's like, we think it like, I don't know if you relate, but for me, when I was starting to masturbate, when I was, I don't know, 13 or whatever it was hidden, it was quiet, it was
Yep.
in the bathroom. So I had all these
Yep.
siblings. It happened in 4 minutes or less. And I just did everything I could to
Yep.
get to ejaculation, right? And then it would happen over and over and over again, right?
Hmm.
And no one taught me that, but somehow we download unconsciously and learn, oh, well, I can't talk to anybody about this, and it better be secretive. And there's
Hmm.
no one to help me learn. I kind of have to figure it out myself, or maybe there's, or the ways that we're learning are can move into abuse or all kinds of things, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like, how do we say, wow, like I'm in this sacred erotic life,
Hmm.
and that is good news, yo. That is good news, and it's
Well, it is good
rare.
news. It is such good juju. I mean, interesting that you
Yeah.
brought up like what the whole pleasure thing is. I was working with a client about a month ago who's just coming out of the closet and everything. And we were having a very frank conversation about, he hadn't had any experiences sexually with a man yet. I'm like, so what do you
Wow.
believe your pleasure is? He
Mm.
goes, well, I think I want to experience this. I'm like, yes, but what is the pleasure you want? Okay, so I know I can talk like this. It's my podcast and we know to, so we're going to go there. Like when you get fucked, what is the pleasure you want from that? He goes, well, I'm not
Yeah.
really sure. I said, well, I'm going to invite you to imagine what that is. I know you haven't experienced it, but what is it beyond just the penetration? What is it? And the
Yeah.
more we kept playing around with different things, not toys. He was on Zoom, I'm on Zoom. But as I
Ideas.
started like taking him down that pathway, it was really interesting to hear him finally say, for me, the pleasure I want to most experience is freedom. It's
Yes. Liberation, freedom.
yeah,
Absolutely.
freedom and liberation.
Absolutely.
And when
Mm.
we really think about, I'm going to say sex acts, but intimacy acts, any of this, even somebody who is a side, there's a beautiful intimacy and a pleasure that comes from if you don't enjoy penetration and you don't enjoy
Yeah.
oral or whatever, you just enjoy that stroking, that touching another man's body, that holding
Connection.
a cock in your
Intimacy.
hand. There's this beautiful
Yeah.
connection that ignites this pleasure. This is what it means for me. And I'm glad you said this, Craig, because I think for many gay men, we have been held at bay and told you can't talk about what real pleasure is. And then you can't ask for what you want. And then you wonder why you get so upset in sexual situations or in a relationship when the bottom line is for some guys, it's going to be, I really enjoy being with you, but I need to experience pleasure of other beings and other bodies to be
Hmm.
feeling fully alive. That's a scary conversation for many of us to have with a partner. But when it's done in a really beautiful way of, I want you to tell me now what would bring you more pleasure. Some guys will say, my pleasure comes from watching you be with another guy. Okay, so wow, now we have something here. just because it all happens on porn, guys, doesn't mean that's going to be what you experience. But for some people, I want that heart pounding, sort of pleasure thing to happen.
Yeah.
And being open to that freedom is what
Mhm.
I think this whole experience is about.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's been the most
It doesn't
interesting thing?
surprise me.
Well, I'm just real curious. I mean, I want you to get to there. What's one of the most interesting things you've seen when men step into the body electric experience and finally hit that liberation point, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it actually relates to what I was going to say because, it doesn't surprise me that when you ask people, what does your pleasure look like, that they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like the answers don't come. And even people who, when you say like, having conversations with your lover and asking for what you want, and they don't know how to do it, or it feels like a wall is there, or they don't know. It's just, we get blank because it's like the idea that I can ask for something or I can actually
Mm-hmm.
communicate my pleasure. Like those are things that we must practice.
Well, it's like
You
going to the
know,
gym. If you
yeah,
don't
we must
work, if you
practice it.
don't work those muscles, you can't if you don't practice it, you can't do it.
And that's something for which all of us need support and help. It's not going to just come naturally to be able to communicate through your fear or your resistance. It's not going to naturally just happen to start communicating your desire. We must put ourselves in spaces with support to figure out how to build those tools and those skills to
Mm-hmm.
practice that. And so body electric is one of those things. And so many things come, like one thing, for instance, in terms of this thread, in body electric, what I see is people who wake up and say, "Oh my God, I've been like just actually I just taught a workshop recently, weekends ago, and this person at the end of the experience started to cry because he said, I've been my whole life focusing on the needs of everyone else, and I've never ever even asked myself, what do I want or what I desire?" And he woke up to this thing of like, oh my God, I've spent my whole life thinking about the needs of other people and not asking myself the question, what do I want? That right there is an entry point for liberation.
Absolutely.
So those
Such a
moments
biggie.
of ahas, when we get consciousness about how we are, the habits, the unconscious habits, how we're in the world, and we see it, and we go, oh my God, like I don't want to be living that way. I
Mm-hmm.
do want to begin asking myself, what do I love? And what does my pleasure feel like? And how do I get support to explore that in safe and skillful ways?
One of the
Yeah.
most pivotal points for me in the last few years, I'm a guy of a certain age. I just turned 61 in August.
Right. Happy birthday.
And thank you. And because of I've never really had an issue with age. Even when I turned 60, I was like, so 50 was my biggie. I was like, oh wow. But then things are starting to shift, and
Mhm.
I still get good erections and all that sort of stuff, but what I desire is different. And as I
Yes.
started to realize what I desire was different, I remember the first time I actually verbalized it to my husband, like, I'm not sure I really enjoy, topping or bottoming anymore. I do it because I'm a very versatile sort of erotic being, but I don't know that I enjoy it the way I used to. And
Yeah.
the next hardest part of that whole conversation was, here's what I find that I really enjoy.
Bingo.
And in that moment, I felt completely liberated. Like, okay, I don't need to be ashamed that I'm not going to be porn
Yeah.
star power top anymore. That I'm not, when I do succumb to, the bottom bunk, so to speak, there's a really good reason I'm going. It's like in that moment, it feels good. But would I say I'm a power bottom every day anymore? No, I never was.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. So now I own this is where my pleasure centers are. And,
Yes.
simple things. I remember watching
Yes.
Gwyneth Paltrow's I can't remember the name of it right now, but she had a whole series that was with a gal by the name of Miss Jaya. And Miss Jaya lives in LA, and she does some erotic blueprint sort of stuff and everything. And I found it really interesting that they showcase all this. They didn't actually showcase a gay couple. They showcase lesbians. I'm like, okay, love you, Gwyneth, but you should have had a gay male couple on this show too, right? Interestingly enough, now I've gotten to know a few of her people, and they've been on the podcast who've gone through her program. But what was interesting about it was
Mhm.
the liberation and the freedom. She kept bringing that, like, live into your pleasure, live into your pleasure, live into your pleasure. It was such a beautiful continuation of what we've been talking about, Craig, because
That's
it
what's
was giving people
revolutionary.
permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So even the question, what do I desire?
Yes.
That is a revolutionary question that goes against centuries and eons of religious programming. It's revolutionary.
But
What does my pleasure feel like? What is my
mm,
relationship to pleasure? That question, that contemplation is revolutionary and liberative.
but here's what's interesting, Craig, and I thought about this knowing we were going to have this conversation. I've been like thinking, what can Craig and I talk about that we haven't talked about? But we're covering great territory here. But this is a really weird juxtaposition. I was thinking about like what we desire.
Mm.
Okay. So I want everybody listening to think through this. You go to a restaurant, you get the menu in your hand, and you're trying to figure out what you desire. But then maybe you're with a group and people start ordering, and then you start hearing what everybody else is getting. But the thing you may have really thought you wanted suddenly starts to kind of shift because, for whatever reason, and we as humans tend to like shift everything and go, oh, let's get this instead. Now, that may be because that sounds better, but a lot of times when you say, what would you like to eat? You default back to what, well, let's do this. Now, some of us are going to do that because it's what we need to be eating to stay healthy. But when you think in general, Craig, the question of what would you desire, or what would you like as humans, it is one of the hardest questions for all of us to be most honest about. And it has nothing to do with just the erotic pleasure stuff. It's in life in general.
Not
And
only to be
we,
honest about, not only to be
mm-hmm.
honest about, but to even discern,
Yep.
let alone
Mm-hmm.
communicating it. It's like, can I? And part of that I really think is the cultivation of kind of inner awareness. And so few of
Mm-hmm.
us, it's hard to do that. We're so distracted and we're not trained to kind of really turn inward and really feel
Well, part of
feel
it too
what
is
is
the
true for us.
confidence, the having the
Mm.
confidence to articulate that too.
Mhm.
It's such a big thing. When I finally admitted to myself that, and this has, and I'm not going to go deep into the story because people heard it, but when I admitted to myself after I got laid off that I no longer desired to work for somebody, that was a
Yes.
huge thing. I didn't know what
Yes.
I was going to, I mean, I knew I was going to, coaching was kind of out there and all this, but nothing like what I've now created. But then 5 years ago, when I decided to go back to work for a company, I asked myself this the same question. What is it you desire right now in your world, Rick? What is it you desire? And I thought, I want to keep doing coaching. I
Yeah.
really desire to have a little more, quote, steady income. I love the pursuit of finding coaching clients and all this sort of stuff, but I want to be
Yeah.
doing something where I still have impact. But I asked that question, what is it I desire? And because of all those answers, Craig, and again, we're not talking about anything about erotic stuff. I found the peace of mind. I found the place to go, ooh, and I love now what I get to do because I get to run my own business. I get to do podcasts. I get to be fully supportive in this other thing where I'm a lead coach. But I gave myself permission to answer the question, what do you desire? And if we
And the
don't give
answers
ourselves
come
permission
so
to do
quickly.
that,
Yeah.
yes.
Permission to ask it and then to let ourselves be in the contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
answers don't always come in the timing we want. Sometimes we need to
Mm-hmm.
stay in the question for a while for the answers to emerge from within.
So we have
So
this
yeah,
event coming up,
yes,
and
yes.
you're
So
really
so but
focusing
yeah,
around that space of religious and
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
Why
yeah.
was why
Yeah.
was that important for you, man?
Well, again, body electric, I think just generally is in the question of how do we support people's liberation.
Yep.
And that's, through the portal of the erotic, through the portal of our bodies. And we've just discerned over the course of 40 years, Body Electric it's our 40th anniversary, that a large impact, of course, on our experience of the erotic is this religious cultural programming that seeks to control, manage, shut down this beautiful birthright of our own erotic energy and our own who we are as a sexual and erotic being. And so a group of people recently came together and we decided that we wanted to start offering experiences to welcome people in to body electric workshops in a way that really specifically welcomes the exploration of this religious programming and the impact it's had on their lives, their erotic lives, their sexual lives, their whole life. And through the process of body electric, which is experiential, which is about breath and touch and inner awareness. And so we decided that the first experience that we want to create as an experiment is to really welcome religious leaders, priests, clergy, rabbis, anyone who's in sort of a religious leadership role to come and have an experience of reclaiming their erotic selves within the context of their divinity. Because if we could get religious leaders to sort of have that personal experience themselves, to do some work around healing and reclaiming and bridging the gap between their sacred, their religious, and their erotic selves, then they would be wonderful people to tell other people about it. And then we could kind of really sort of build this and bring in more and have more workshops where that it wouldn't be just specifically focused on religious leaders necessarily, but anyone who desires liberation around religious programming. So that's been kind of the idea. And so we're having a first experiment with this right outside Kansas City, Missouri. It's a Tuesday to Friday, Tuesday, November 19th to Friday the 22nd. We did that specifically for religious leaders because they need to be home often on the weekend. And the workshop's called Healing the Sacred Erotic Connection, which is a 4-day workshop welcoming clergy, lay ministers, any religious leaders or guides into a deep experience of reclaiming their sacred and their erotic selves. And so it's an experiment, and we're really just hoping that this can be very powerful and useful for people. You know, that's why Body Electric exists, is to support people in their healing and their liberation.
I love that. I love it so much. I mean, and that's why I jumped at it when you and John Carl brought this to me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I just feel like there's this, and as you were talking through this, I'm like, I could see this beginning to be a really beautiful repeating, well, not only for that group, but another repeating way of like, okay, well, how do we heal the sacred erotic connection to a guy who has been in a heterosexual relationship, and you have to heal all of that because there's things that come around that too. Coming, no pun intended, boys, but there's something interesting because I've heard this from a lot of guys who've been in heterosexual relationships and come out like, I don't feel like I fit. Am I going to be good? I don't know if I really understand who I am now as a gay. I mean, there's a shift, any of us who come out of the closet. Yes. But when you've been ingrained in like a deeper relationship, which is kind of similar to this whole sacred religious thing, that's a relationship. Your relationship is with a faith, with a practice, with a, way of being in the world. It's a similar thing for a guy who's been in, most of my clients on average, at a minimum, have been in their heterosexual relationships at least 15 to 20 years. And many of them, it's 20 to 30 some odd years when this finally, quote, awakens within them. And so I love the work that Body Electric does. I'm always referring people like, hey, I don't know if you can make it. They do these all over the country. But mostly, especially when I have guys, Craig, that are like really struggling with confidence, they kind of get a little petrified when I say, I think you need to go do some Body Electric work, even though you think you're having good sex and everything. There's a piece of this that's going to open up doorways to other things in life. Like if you're afraid to go for a promotion at work, if you're afraid to like ask somebody out, if you're afraid to like take your shirt off in public, all of these things come down to the core essence of what's within ourselves and accepting who we are. So it's really beautiful stuff you're doing.
Wonderful. And actually, for some people, going to a naked weekend, which, oftentimes are the first kind of the celebrating body erotic weekend initiatory experience, is often clothing off. And that can be really hard for people to get through that door. And so actually, I'm starting on September 19th, Wednesday, September 19th. I'm going to be teaching a 4-session online course that we're calling Body Electric 101. And so it's 4 weeks, 4 Wednesdays, starting September 19th. And this is just an opportunity from the safety of your own home. You never have to get undressed. It's just kind of getting together with other like-minded explorers to say, what is this body electric thing? And so really what that workshop does is lay the foundation of what we do in Body Electric, my connection to my breath, my embodiment, my pleasure, reclaiming those things. What is sacred to me? All of the things that we teach in Body Electric in an online intro course. So for some people, that could be an
Nice.
easier onboarding into the world, if that's interesting.
Oh, come on, guys, just dive in, go get naked. Come on, let's no.
Yeah,
I
Wednesday the
agree.
19th, 7 to 9
Yeah,
p.m. Eastern. It's going to be awesome. And it's all on the Body Electric website, www.bodyelectric.org.
Awesome. So that one, as well as the one for Kansas City area, right?
Yes.
Both
And the one in Kansas City, again, is November 19th and 22nd. It's called Healing the Sacred Erotic Connection. That's up for registration too. And if anybody has any questions at all, you can contact me. I'm also available for coaching like you are at CraigCullinane.com, or you can contact me there, or you can contact me at the Body Electric at Craig.Cullinane@bodyelectric.org.
That's awesome.
And I'm happy to.
And you can, and if none of you catch all that, reach out to me. I'll get you connected to Craig. Of course, first I'll assess if he's a good coach for you. I mean, I have the checklist. Like, is he really that? No, Craig is amazing. But I'm gonna tell one last story, because I feel like, and some listeners can say we've heard this story before, but I think it will really truly set the tone for, like, is Body Electric, are these experiences for you? It was 2015. I had been working with a group of coaches, gay and straight coaches, and we put together a retreat in Bermuda. And it ended up being really interesting, Craig. It was like 50% straight guys, 50% gay, bisexual men. Okay. I'm like, well, this is kind of cool. You know, well, let's see how this all works out together. And each of us brought different pieces to the programming, right?
Yes.
And one of the experiences that we did, I guess it was the first day of the retreat. We came in and we had a really good evening, and it was a long night. We ended up not going to bed till almost 3 a.m. because everybody was sharing. And as people started to share, then it opened up. And we're on this island in Bermuda and out in the middle of the forest, all this sort of stuff. So the next day, I did my piece about coming out and being really out about who you are and all that. And, there were tears and everything. Well, then my other co-facilitator for that day, he did an amazing experience. And guys, I want you to listen to what I'm asking you to think through right now, because I think this will really tell you where you could give yourself permission to do some work and to be intimate and to be open. We had the guys stand in a circle. There were 2 circles. There was an inner circle and an outer circle. The inner circle faced outward, the outer circle faced inward, and you were looking right at another guy. And we had a series of questions. He had a series of questions that he started asking, like, tell your partner about the first time that you felt really insecure as a boy. And they'd share, and then we'd say, okay, now the outer circle, step to the right, and then the next question. And so they kept moving. So the inner circle stayed where they are. But the whole point was, as we went around, eventually everybody will have kind of talked to everybody, right? And every once in a while he'd switch and go, okay, now the inner circle, I want you to shift back this direction, so that you were really getting a lot of different people. Well, obviously it was about opening, being vulnerable, sharing, living, starting to get deeper and deeper. The last question was, tell your partner what you most love about your penis.
Good question.
Okay. Now he did this very well, building up, like, if you can talk about these things, and as soon as he said the question,
it's not the first question.
No, it's not the first. You do not start with this, guys. But the reason it was so effective is, of course, the group got really, really quiet. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But then what was interesting is the first guy that started to speak to his partner started really kind of quiet, which it did then give everybody else permission. Like, okay, somebody started, so let's all go, because it was almost like, let's all start talking so everybody can't hear everybody's stuff. But then what started really happening in a really beautiful way is there was no shame talking about this. There was no shame about any of us. And it didn't turn into the locker room. Well, I love it because mine's really big and thick. But some guys you could hear, I'm like, what I really love about it is mine is really, it's really thick. And it brings a lot of pleasure, not only. And I remember hearing this one guy, because I was facilitating. So I was like trying to stay in the wings, so to speak. But I remember his voice so beautifully saying, one of the things I most love is the girth, because it fits really good in my own hand and brings me so much pleasure. But because of my girth and not the length, I have found that I can give a woman pleasure in a way that some guys can't. And as soon as everybody kind of, because he was pretty loud about it, right? Not like loud, I'm sharing this, but like you could tell his confidence was so up.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else kind of had permission now to really talk.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of that story, guys that are listening, is never be ashamed to talk about what brings you pleasure. Never be ashamed to see yourself as a beautiful erotic being and these beautiful things that we have been given as human beings that are erotic pleasure places.
And that's another thing to reclaim, because I can imagine that there's some people hearing that question have deep shame and stories about their relationship with their cock.
Yep.
And to ask that question, they're like, I don't have anything that I think is good about it, and so just even that awareness. But yeah, I mean, in Body Electric, that's something too. We really welcome this idea of like, what's my relationship with my cock, and can I heal that too?
Yeah. Well, yeah, with your cock, with your butt, with your chest, with your flabby. I'm 60 years old. I'm like, okay, I got to keep working out. These arms are starting to do the 60-year-old flab.
How do
right?
we deeply befriend ourselves?
Yes, exactly.
How do we befriend ourselves? Stop doing stop lacerating ourselves with our stories and thoughts. Yeah.
Well, Craig, I have to say, I'm so
so
glad
much,
that
Rick.
we have befriended each other and made this possible.
Yes.
And again, guys, all the information, Body Electric, all those things. You got 2 events, one starting the 19th of September, the other one coming up in November. Highly encourage you to go, support yourself and support Body Electric if you feel this is a way for you to move forward in your beautiful, beautiful 40+ erotic life. So thanks for being listeners. Yes. Thank you again, Craig, for being here. And guys, go out and have an amazing, fabulous week being truly yourself unapologetically in the world as a gay and bisexual man. And thanks again, Craig, for being here.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for 40+. Gay men, gay talk, where size doesn't matter. We drop our bullshit, get over our screwed up fears, make bold moves, and live life without apologies. Don't forget to join us on Facebook at 40+, Gay Men, Gay Talk, where the conversations continue.